Big group. My name's Rick. I'm an alcoholic. Man, I sat down and half y'all weren't here. I turned around. Yeah, I just want to say thank you, Steve, for inviting me to be here tonight, and thank you for Primary Purpose for having me. Steve and Jeanette have always been very hospitable and some of my favorite people in Alcoholics Anonymous, and always have a good time when I'm hanging out with you guys, and I promise that doesn't have anything to do with you guys feeding me every time I see you. But I know this is a solid group too. I'm glad to be here. I'm always humbled when I'm asked to speak for Alcoholics Anonymous. You know, sometimes it just feels a little undeserved. I remember sitting in these rooms when I first got sober and just, seeing people doing this and thinking that was so far out of reach. So to think of how far I've came, man, it's always just a good time to reflect in that week or so before I come to speak. And I don't care what they say, man. They say not to take others' inventory, but when I walk into a group and I see a stack of pamphlets and a snack table like that, I know it's a pretty solid group of Alcoholics Anonymous. But with that, man, my sobriety date is June 2nd, 2020. June 1st, I was not doing too good. But I'll talk more on that in a minute. My home group is New Inner City Group. We meet in Raleigh, North Carolina. So if you're ever up that way and you're looking for a meeting, we meet on Thursday nights at 8 p.m. We do a step study, tradition study, literature, and then a speaker meeting every month. If there is a fifth Thursday, we do a workshop. My home group and my sponsorship lineage, we obviously believe in sponsorship, and I'm currently sponsored, have been since the day I got sober, and I've had the privilege of sponsoring other men, and I don't know if I'd be standing here before you today if it wasn't for that. I heard one guy say it one time, and he said that if you could figure out how to put sponsorship and service work into a pill, we could cure alcoholism. And I believe that because those two things have been vital for my recovery. Got a service position in that home group. I think I got all the qualifications out of the way. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about how this is going to go. I'm probably going to try and steer it for the first 5 minutes, and then God usually takes over and it goes a lot smoother. So just bear with me. If you get through the beginning, we'll be all right. Me and Aaron's been sponsoring me now for a little over a year, and we've been reading some stuff, and I could sit here and tell you from day one, what it was like when I was, first born and my upbringing and stuff. But to be honest with you, I don't know if much of that has anything to do with why I became an alcoholic. The longer I've stayed sober and the more I've worked the steps, I really just can't attribute my alcoholism to any event or any trauma or misfortune that I experienced as a child. Because to be honest, I know several people that have experienced similar traumas and misfortunes, and they didn't drink the way I did. I think at the end of the day, the reason I drink as an alcoholic was because I like the effects produced by alcohol. It made me feel like, all the confidence in the world. I'm good looking, I grew up in a kind of a split home, right? I can't remember a time when my mother and my father were together under the same roof. So I was always back and forth. My great-grandfather, he had a nickname for me. He called me Hobo. It was the guys back in the day that used to hop trains from town to town, and I guess it was pretty fitting for me as a child because I spent a lot of time back and forth between mom's house, dad's house, both my grandparents, and he might have been foreshadowing a little bit because I carried that on into my 30s. I was all over the place. I tried to outrun alcoholism and my own problems, and I did that for a long time unsuccessfully. So first time I drank alcohol, I was about 13 or 14 years old. I would have kept better records if I'd have known I had to come and share it with all of you. But I do know that my uncle, he's about 7-8 years age difference, right? And he had just turned 21. So that puts me about 13 or 14. And funny story, we were actually here in this area. There's a campground here in Pinehurst. And my grandparents used to have a little camper that they kept parked there, and over the summer we'd come down and spend, a couple weeks out every summer, and they'd bring me and my sister. And this one weekend my uncle showed up, and he had just turned 21, and he had brought along a half-gallon of Aristocrat vodka, and it was the blue label. I don't know if you're drinking the red label, you might be all right. If you drink the blue stuff, you probably need to be in a room like this. But he had a half-gallon of that. And he made a deal with me that if I went to a little general store at this campground and I purchased a couple of orange juices, he'd give me a little bit of this vodka. Sounded like an even trade for me. I'd seen people drinking, grew up around it. Alcoholism runs through both sides of my family. But I never really saw the dark side of alcoholism, man. In my young mind, it was all good times, right? I saw the adults hanging out by the fire, and they'd kick us kids away, and they'd all be out there listening to music and laughing and falling over, and it looked interesting to me, right? So if I can go buy a couple of orange juices and see what that's all about, it sounded like a good deal. And so I went down there, I bought a couple Tropicana orange juices, and he mixed me a screwdriver for my first drink. I tipped it back and couldn't stand the taste. But I can tell you a few minutes later, that sense of ease and comfort, like the book talks about, it kind of took over. And like I was saying, all that confidence, I grew up, I was like this. I hear a lot of people talk from the podium, right? Like I had this sense that I didn't fit in. I was a chubby little kid, wasn't too popular with the girls. I was into like nerdy things. I just wasn't like Mr. Popular, right? And alcohol just took all that away. And I was the best looking kid at that campground that weekend. And, I was a go-getter, had all the confidence in the world. I was talking to everybody and friendly and having the time of my life. And that's what alcohol did for me. So as much as I hated the taste, I loved those effects. And I can't say that at that time, I made this decision that I'm going to do that every chance I get. But that's really what turned out to be, right? Every chance I could, from that age on, it's pretty hard to get your hands on liquor and stuff when you're 13, 14. But every chance that I could get, I was going to consume some alcohol, just because I loved the way it made me feel. And so that continued for a few years. I should add this, though. I did drink alcoholically from day one, because that night I blacked out. I drunk myself to a blackout. I finished that one Tropicana orange juice. I was acting a little sloppy. My uncle cut me off, and that doesn't work well for somebody who drinks like I do. Even, on the first go, I started figuring out, well, I see where he put it. And after he got a little tipsy, he was out by the fire, and I saw where he hid the bottle. So I'd sneak back in there. And at this point, I'm out of orange juice. So now I'm just taking the half gallon and turning it up. And I had no idea of, moderation or anything at that point. So I can't say I ever did, honestly. But I got completely plastered, and I ended up blacking out. The last few faint memories that I had is I was sitting on this handrail behind a bathhouse at this campground, and I think a couple walked by me to go in there and take a shower and clean up for the evening or whatever, and the breeze off of their body knocked me off of this handrail, and I landed on my back and knocked the wind out of my lungs, and I got myself up, and then I was feeling sick, and so I threw up everywhere. And my grandparents had this campers that they were all sleeping in the AC, but me and my sister, we would sleep in this little tent outside of it, right? And so at some point, I guess, I made my way back to that tent, and I woke up the next day around noon, and this is like summertime, right? June or July in North Carolina heat. So I wake up, and I'm just, I'm cooking in this thing. It's like being in a sauna, and I'm covered in my own fluids and just feeling horrible. And I couldn't wait to do it all over again. And that really is kind of a precursor to how my drinking looks for the next 15, 16 years. But I can't honestly say that my whole drinking career was horrible times. I had a lot of good times drinking. Problem is, like I said earlier, June 1st, the good times were long gone. This illness that I have is progressive, like the big book talks about, and I believe that 100%. And I tested that theory a few times, that I'd come around AA and I'd get sober for a little while, and I'd learn some things that you guys were talking about, and then I can handle it from here, and I'd end up drunk, and it would just get worse and worse and worse each time. June 1st of 2020, I'd been bouncing in and out of AA for about 5 years. And when I say bouncing in and out of AA, I use that term lightly because really I was just hanging out at AA meetings, right? Like I'd find a meeting like this that had a good snack table, and I'd come and sit in the back and steal some Oreos and take a couple sodas for the road, and then I might see y'all next week, depending on if I felt like, getting some more snacks, but it had nothing to do with getting sober usually. I wasn't getting a sponsor, I wasn't working the steps, not getting the home group, getting involved in all the things that sober people in these rooms were saying that they were doing. And so I did that for about 5 years, and I remember the last night, drinking for me, it was June 1st, I was sleeping in my truck because my family up to that point, you know, they'd been really supportive. I have a great family, loved me unconditionally, tried everything they could to help me for years. And I would just throw it in their face. And I think that they finally just had gotten to a point where they were tired of watching me kill myself. And so they were not having me around. I wasn't welcome in their homes. And I was going back and forth between sleeping in my truck and sleeping at a couple of just random spots, either friends' houses or acquaintances, or when I'd overstay my welcome there was a little squat off of this place. Aaron knows what I'm talking about. I showed him a picture because I went by there when I was in Fayetteville last just to snapshot it so I could look at that whenever I, needed a little pick-me-up. But I can't tell you that house was owned by anybody that stayed there, right? I didn't ask any questions. I just knew that there was always a spot I could be. And at any given time, there was 5 to 10 of us just hanging out in there. And we were all kind of living the same kind of lifestyle. So, didn't have to worry about anybody getting on my case about my drinking there. But even hanging out there, I'd get tired of those people. And then my truck sounded like a better option for a while. So I'd just bounce back and forth between those two sleeping situations. But that night I was sleeping in my truck. I was behind this sandwich shop in Fayetteville. This is it's where I got sober. It's where I'm from as well. I live in Raleigh now, but I was born and raised in Fayetteville, so pretty familiar with Southern Pines and Pinehurst area. But I remember that night, man, just for 3-4 weeks prior to that, I'd been on this full-out relapse. And for about 3 or 4 weeks, I'd kept telling myself, tomorrow, I'm done. I'm going to get back on the wagon, and I'm putting this stuff up, and I'm really going to go in a different direction this time. And the next day would come, and I'd make it maybe till about noon, 1 o'clock, and I'd start drinking again. And I'd get a little booze in my system, start feeling better, and I'd make those same promises. Tomorrow, I'm done. And I did that for probably a month. And that night, I don't know if you want to call it a moment of clarity or what, but I just saw myself for what I was, man, that I had just been lying to myself this whole time, really. Nobody else was fooled by my lies at that point, they could see it. And every night I was telling myself that I wasn't going to do this, and here I am again doing it, and I can't stop myself. And I was crying that night, and I mean, not like a little whimper. I'm talking about a full-on, it's not a pretty sight when you see a grown man, snot and tears running down his face, right? And that's where this disease got me, right? Sleeping in my truck, just a grown man crying. I weighed about 180 pounds at the time, which on a guy my size is not flattering. I looked like skin and bones. Face was all sunken in. I had dark circles around my eyes, just pale. And wasn't eating anything. And I remember crying because I didn't want to drink that night, but I knew I was going to. And I had no choice in the matter. I just could not stop myself. And I was driving to go get some more booze. And, at that point, man, I didn't even, when I pulled into the parking lot, I didn't even have the drink, hadn't took a sip of it yet. But that same sense of like ease and comfort came. I knew everything was going to be all right as soon as I got in that door and I got that drink. And then we just start this whole cycle back over again. And I knew that's what was coming. And so I did that. Went back to my little parking spot behind the sandwich shop, and I continued to drink and just really think about where my life had gotten me and where it was going to end. And I think that was the first time that I had come to terms with the fact that I was truly powerless over this thing, and that this was a fatal illness, and that it was going to kill me. It wasn't I know I drink, but I'm not as bad as those guys, and I was without a doubt convinced at that point that I'm going to die of this thing if I don't get some help. So luckily, in those 5 years that I've been kind of hanging out at AA meetings, I'd met a few people, and I had some numbers. And one guy, he had tried to reach out to me a few times. I'd come hang out for a month or two, 6 months maybe, and I'd get sober for a little while and disappear. And this one guy, he would always keep up with me, as long as I'd let him. Most of the time I'd get to a point where I didn't want to pick up the phone because I knew he was going to try and 12-step me. And I'm like, I'm not ready. So I just ignored. But I remember sitting there that night and drinking and thinking, and that's two things that don't usually go well together, drinking and thinking. And I remember that morning, I was a decent human being, right? I was like, well, I got some booze. I can get through the night. I'll call him in the morning. I don't want to wake the guy up at 3 a.m. So I let him sleep, and I finished my booze, and next morning I woke up, and, I was awake. I woke him up. And I called this guy at 8 a.m. Now, mind you, I've been ignoring his calls for months, and he'd been trying to reach out to me, and this guy picked up on the first ring. And he said, I've been waiting on this phone call. And I'm still, I'm a mess. I'm like bawling my eyes out, and I'm telling him, how miserable I am. And he's like, yeah, I get it. Yeah. And he said, where are you at? So I told him, and within an hour, now mind you, this is like a weekday. Within an hour, that guy, he's got a family, a job, all this stuff. Within an hour, that man was in that same parking lot. And he picked me up. And excuse me if I get a little emotional, because this is, I don't know, every time I talk about this, it's just, I owe my life to that guy. But he picked me up. He took me to an Alcoholics Anonymous meeting in Fayetteville, the German Street meeting. I don't know if any of you have ever been there, but little clubhouse meetings. So they had I think a 10 a.m. meeting. He took me to the German Street meeting, and then afterwards he bought me a pack of cigarettes, and he sat there in the parking lot with me, and he talked for about an hour or two, and we decided that, it's probably best if I go back to detox for the umpteenth time, right? Like, let's get that stuff out of your system, go somewhere where you can sit still for a while, and then we'll figure something out from there. I've been through that process so many times, I can't even tell you an accurate number. And so when I started it again this time, I was not sure that it was going to work out again, right? I can tell you that the two things that were different this time was the fact that I truly believed that I was powerless over this thing, like I said, and that it was going to kill me. The second thing was I had this whole new willingness, because I had nowhere to go but up from there, right? Like, that parking spot is still going to be there if I want to come back to it, right? But I feel like there's some better stuff that I can get to if I just stay sober for a while. I think that I had lost enough at that point that I was willing to try some of those things that I never did before: sponsorship, steps, a home group. I could not fathom why people were telling me, you need to show up an hour early and he'll make the coffee. I'm like, dude, I drink a lot. I don't know how making coffee is like gonna fix that, but it's just that prejudice, right? Like, I thought I knew it all. You guys were sicker than me, and I came in this time, man, not knowing nothing. Just, what do you want me to do? And I think those things were necessary, right? The book talks about alcohol being a great persuader that beats us into a state of reasonableness, and I had finally been beaten into that state of reasonableness. There wasn't much left for me out there. And like I said before, I had a lot of good times drinking and partying, but those last couple of years, through all those relapses, I can't tell you one good time. It was all miserable. And I would lie to myself before I go back out and say, I'll probably enjoy it for a little while. I know it's going to get bad again, but I can control it for a little bit, and that was just never the case. So with all that, he dropped me off at this detox, and I spent a few days in there, and left there, went to this treatment center where I'd been around AA enough, right, that I knew what you guys were offering. And I could have sat in another treatment center for 3, 4, 6 months, and I'm not saying that I advocate for doing this or not doing this. I'm just telling you my experience, right? But I only sat in that treatment center for about 10 days. Really, I just got myself dried out enough where I was physically through the withdrawals. And once I started to feel okay physically, I wish I could tell you I felt better mentally, but I think I felt worse. But I knew that that physical dependency was gone at least. And so I stood a chance, and I could have sat in this treatment center for a few more months, but I met this gentleman there on a Sunday, and he showed up to carry a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous. And when he walked in, he was dressed much like I am and very well-spoken and put together. And I couldn't stand the guy, to be honest, just from looks. I looked at him and I was like, yeah, me and this guy are not, we have nothing in common. And I can tell you, he chaired the meeting that day, and when he opened up and shared some of his experience, all those walls just like fell apart, right? Like I thought that me and this guy, we look different, we're cut from different cloth, he's well put together, looks like he's got money, I'm sleeping in my truck, haven't had a haircut or shaved in 4 months. And when that guy talked about drinking and alcoholism, I knew right away that like he knew exactly what I was dealing with, and we had a lot more in common than I thought. And so after the meeting, I went up to him and I asked him if he would sponsor me through the steps. And he said, yeah, give me a call tomorrow. And like, that AA trickery, right? Let's see how willing this guy is. And so I did. I followed up with that guy because, like I said, I had this whole new willingness. Like I really didn't want to die. And I really didn't want to go back to sleeping in my truck in the middle of June. So I called this guy, and after about 10 days in that treatment center, he said, hey, I own this halfway house, if you will. And a couple guys that are, trying to do the same thing you're doing, just trying to get their lives back together and stay sober. They stay in there, and we got a bed available. So if you're interested in that bed, maybe you can come to the meeting tonight at the Dream Center and talk to these guys and see if they want to vote you in. And so I did, man. I was ready, and I went down there that night and I introduced myself to these guys, and they did a meeting, emergency house meeting that night, and got me into that house. And I thought, well, I got to go back to treatment center tonight and then come back tomorrow morning or something. And those guys wouldn't even let me leave, man. They cooked a meal for me and put some clean sheets on the bed, and they just made me feel a part of right away. And man, really, that's what AA has been for me every time I've come back, right? It's just open arms. Nobody's ever judged me or put me down for my, mistakes or relapses. They just bring me back in like nothing ever happened, right? And those guys made me feel at home, and they gave me a place, man. And I'm staying in this little 1,200 square foot shack on Sapona Road in East Fayetteville. And I was so grateful, man. Like I'm a 30-year-old man. I'm sleeping in a twin bed, and I got a roommate. And I was happy to be there. I can't tell you how happy I was. And we had a rat the size of a possum that lived in there too. But that's another story. I'll tell you guys that one after the meeting. But I mean, that's just where my life was at, right? Like I was grateful to have that rat as a roommate, man. Like it's better than the parking lot. And so, this guy that was sponsoring me at the time, some of you know him. That guy exposed me to a whole different brand of AA. And I'm not saying that I wasn't exposed to it before or other people were doing it wrong, but what I can say is that I think there was this combination of willingness from me and being a little bit more open-minded this go around and willing to listen to people, that he just opened up a whole new world for me in Alcoholics Anonymous, inviting me to conventions and other groups. I thought, there's like 7 groups that meet in all of Fayetteville, and I'm thinking like, that's AA, right? And like, he's like taking me all over the state and introducing me to people and fellowshipping after. I didn't know that was a thing. Like I said, I'd steal some snacks and go sleep back in my truck, and come to find out, you guys were partying at the Mexican restaurant for an hour afterwards. So I was missing out on all these things, and this guy just really brought me in, right? Made me a part of his life, and everything he went to do, he drugged me along with him. And more importantly, we met every week, and we got into the book, and we read page for page from the doctor's opinion all the way up to Dr. Bob's Nightmare. And when that book said to stop and do something, we stopped and did it. When we got to how it works, like I said, I've been to enough meetings. I saw what you guys were doing and talking about. So I'm like, the whole time, I'm like, when are we going to do that stuff, man? And he's like, when we get to it, right? So we get to how it works. And, I think that up to that point, man, like 1, 2, and 3, I had pretty much worked. I knew I was powerless, and my life was definitely unmanageable. I wasn't managing too well sleeping in my truck. So, becoming willing to believe that this power greater than myself could restore me to sanity, the first part of that was like I had to realize that I was insane, right? And that had come pretty clear to me those few weeks leading up to me making that phone call, because, like I said, every ounce in my body wanted to stop drinking, and I just knew I couldn't. And I couldn't stop obsessing over it and thinking about it and how I'm going to get it and when I'm going to get it. And my brain was just consumed by alcohol. And I believe that's insanity, right? So now the next thing is, the God part, right? Like I knew you guys had this spiritual solution, and I had heard enough of that and was really turned off by it, to be honest with you. And I say that as part of my story because I know there's still people that come in these rooms that are turned off by the God thing. And I can tell you that when I got here, I didn't believe in higher power. I can't say I was atheist, but I was definitely agnostic, right? Like the more I look into it, but at that time, man, like I just had nothing to do with God. Didn't want anything to do with God, but I didn't want to drink, and I didn't want to drink bad enough that I was willing to try some things. And so that gentleman gave me this sheet of paper that he printed off, had some prayers on it, and I'd wake up every morning, I'd read that prayer, and I'd read some kind of devotional, like 24 hours a day or something. And I'd go about my day. I wouldn't talk to God the rest of the day, and I'd just come back in angry as crap, and I'd do it again the next morning, right? And really, I put a lot of my faith in Alcoholics Anonymous. It wasn't the God thing at first for me. It was more AA and the people in the rooms, right? Like I'd seen these people that were able to turn their lives around, and I believed that they believed. And that's really all I could muster at the time. And that worked for me. So if you struggle with that, it's the reason I share that, right? Like, just, rely on the Fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous and sponsorship if that's all you can at first, and give the rest a shot. Because I can tell you through working the rest of those steps is really where I found that spiritual solution. And God started to become a part of my day-to-day life. So I did a fourth and a fifth step with this guy, and check how I'm doing on time. That fourth step, I wrote everything down. I was super thorough. He pointed out all the stuff in the book, right? Like, we got to get rid of this stuff, or you're sure to drink again. And I'm like, I don't want to do that. So I wrote it all down. I was scared to death to leave something out. And then I met him at his house on a Saturday. And the moment had arrived. Now I got to tell another human being all this stuff, right? And so I got this notebook in front of me, and I'm going through it, and I'm like, yep. So I did this person wrong, I did that person wrong, that one's pretty crazy, we'll skip the page. And I did that about 3 or 4 times, right? There was about 3 or 4 things on that list that I was fully prepared to share with him the night before. And then when I got in front of the man, just turned the page real quick. Just could not bring myself to get this stuff off my chest. And thank God for that guy, because at the end, you read, it's ask you, did we leave anything out, right? Have we tried to make mortar without sand? And he just stared at me for about 3 minutes. It felt like eternity, man. I'm like sitting there in his kitchen, I'm like looking around, like petting the dog, trying to avoid eye contact, and it got real awkward. And what I realized was, like, this guy was comfortable with being awkward, right? So, like, he wasn't going to break. So I had to either get honest or just, sit here. So and to be honest, I tried to sit there. And eventually he said, I'm going to share a few things off of my 5th step with you. And maybe that'll help you out a little bit. And so this guy went down a list, and he gave me about 5 things off of his 5th step. And by the time he was done with that, I'm like, this dude's sick, man. All the stuff I'm thinking I did that sounds so horrible, like, man, he can't tell nobody about it. I got some stuff on him now, right? Like, that's where I was at the time. And so I gave this guy, I was able, because of him doing that, right? Him being honest with me, and him being free of those things, really. I mean, he had worked the steps, he had made some amends, he'd been helping others, right, and taking them through that process. And so he's been free of those things, right? He's no longer ashamed of them. He doesn't carry the guilt. He can share them openly, and he did that, and it broke down those walls again for me, and I was able to come off of some of these things that I could not share up until that point. And, I can't say that I had this, burning bush experience or some bright light, but I can tell you I left that man's house that day and I felt like a weight lifted off my shoulders, like I could breathe again for the first time in 15 or 16 years. And I remember when I was leaving, he's standing under his carport, he's like holding his dog by the leash, and because of what he had done for me, right, I just felt so appreciative. I told this guy, and some of you know him, so you'll probably think this is funnier, but he's holding his dog, and I said, all right, man, I love you, bro. And he just looked at me strangely and walked inside really quick. He doesn't, yeah, if you know him, you get that a lot more. He doesn't like hugs or emotion. He's not here, so just bleep that out for me, Steve. But, I just felt so appreciative for what that guy had done, man, because that was the best I had felt in sobriety ever. And that was just the beginning, right? The big book talks about that this is where a spiritual awakening begins, is at the fourth step. And so that was the beginning for me, right? And then I prayed and I asked God to remove all my defects of character, and he removed maybe one or two and left the rest. And, I think that's something that I had to learn, right? Was that, like, I'm not expected to come in here and be a saint tomorrow. The book talks about that in several different places, spiritual progress rather than spiritual perfection. I could go on, but I was missing that, right? Like, I come in here and I'm seeing all these people that got a lot more time and they've been walking this way of life a long time before me, and I'm thinking I need to be on their level, and I'm 3 months sober, like I need to be right where I'm at. And I had to just learn to give myself a break and not take things too seriously, right? But, know that this disease is serious. It's going to kill me if I don't do something about it, but to give myself a little breathing room, right? Because I would talk myself right out of these rooms, like, I can't do what they're doing. I can't do all this praying. I can't. And I'd go right back out to drinking. And I knew I had to change that, right? Like, it had to be, for a guy like me, I had to change everything. It wasn't like, I can change a few things and stay sober. Like, I knew the way I was living, it had to be a complete change in thinking. And so, I got to that amends process, and I don't know. Everybody's sponsor does it different, right? Some people I've heard say they made a list, they did like index cards, and every time I've worked the steps with my current sponsorship, the book tells us really, it says we made the list when we took our inventory, right? So we went back through that list, and we picked names off of people I owed amends to. And he also pointed out the fact that the first 100, when they were at these steps, like these steps were worked quickly, right? That they were going out and making these amends a week, 2 weeks sober. They were going and making some rights. And I did a lot of smaller amends pretty early on, right? And if I'm being honest, I did the easy ones, right? Like, I owed a few people some money, and I had a little money, so I was like, yeah, I'll make those, and just the little stuff. But there was a few on that list that I got to, and I just spun my wheels for a while, right? And I changed sponsorship. I moved to Raleigh and got a new home group, got a new sponsor. And there was a couple of those that I was still holding on to, and there was one example was there's a situation I owed my father an amends. Hadn't really made a proper amends to him, right? I'd been showing up, being around, trying to be a good son, but hadn't really sat down and tried to have that conversation with him, and he was put in the hospital, and I wasn't sure what that outcome was going to be, right? He wasn't doing very good, and I met with my sponsor that Sunday and kind of told him the situation, and there's only been a couple times that he's gotten kind of stern with me since he started sponsoring me, but he looked at me and he said, I haven't told you much what to do, but he said, if I was you, I'd get up right now, I'd leave, and I'd drive straight to Fayetteville and go see your father and make that amends. And so I did. I got up that day. It was raining outside. I drove straight back, and I sat next to him in the hospital. I made that amends. And, man, today that relationship is amazing. Better than it's ever been. I think it's better now than it was before I, really ruined it with my drinking. And that's just one of the gifts that Alcoholics Anonymous has given me. Through those amends, I think that's really where the God thing set in for me. I was praying and I had a belief in God at that point, but like that's when I really started to see God in a lot of my life, right? And how he had been working for me, and some of those relationships that just had really been strained, probably had no chance of coming back. I started to see those be healed and those relationships mended, and the only thing I could think of was like, God has to be a part of this, right? And I'll give you one more example of that. I have a cousin that she's got a son and a daughter, and I call them niece and nephew because they're just, I'm Uncle Rick to them, but I was on her will to be the godparent of those kids, and during all my drinking and stuff, she had removed me from her will and didn't want me around her kids, and rightfully so, because she had let me stay at her home at one point, and I was drinking around them and just exposed them to a lot of stuff that they hadn't seen at that point. So I was no longer on her will to be the godparent of those kids. Not only did she not trust me to take her kids if something happened to her and her husband, but she didn't want me around them. I wasn't invited to family events. At that point, she hosted a lot of Thanksgivings and Christmas, stuff like that at her house, and I was not really welcome there. So I've had a chance today to make that relationship right, and I get to talk to those kids on like a weekly basis now, and I'm back on her will to be the godparent, which is it's crazy to me. The stuff like that is possible in Alcoholics Anonymous. Excuse me. And, but it didn't stop there, right? I was able to repair some things and make some wrongs right. But, 10, 11, and 12, right? Like, continue to take that personal inventory. That's something I met with Aaron on our way before we came down here. I met him at his house. And I still try to, stay current with my sponsor and continue to look at areas where I need to grow and things that I need to do better. A couple years sober. I sure haven't graduated AA yet. There's still a lot of work to be done. He laughs because he knows how much work. But I can tell you, man, that continuing to seek God and continuing to take a look at where I need to grow is vital to me today. And I can't imagine life without it at this point. It took me a while to get there, but I don't know. My life with God and my life without God are two very different things. And I can tell you that I enjoy my life today. And I'd much rather have God be a part of my life and trying to be around people that are trying to grow spiritually and going in that same direction. It's much better than the way I was living. And so I would like to remain here. And I think a vital part of that is that 12 step too, right? Sponsoring other men, service work. I've been active in both the home groups I've had since I got sober. I've had service positions and I've rotated different service positions. And, when times get rough, because it will happen, the book talks about it, certain trials and low spots ahead, they come. And, I thank God I've had solid sponsorship to get me through that stuff. And those service positions have kept me active in Alcoholics Anonymous, because now I have a responsibility to that home group. And I can't just disappear like I used to, right? I mean, I could, but that sense of responsibility keeps me grounded. And really helping another alcoholic, sitting across from another man at a detox meeting, or whether it's a guy that I'm sponsoring, taking them through the steps and seeing that change in them. I don't know, it's lit this fire for me for AA, right? It's just something that I know what life without that looks like, and it's a much better way of living. So I'm thankful for AA for those reasons. And I got a few minutes, so the book tells me I'm supposed to share a little bit about what it's like. I can tell you, man, that I went from sleeping in my truck behind my sandwich shop by myself. Even if I wanted to hang out with somebody, most people weren't going to pick up my phone calls, right? And today, I got to enjoy a car ride down here with a couple of guys, and we talked about golf and new brake pads, and that sounds boring. It used to me, right? But I had a great time, and that's what my life looks like today, right? It's like I can find joy in the smallest things, and I used to not. I just couldn't. I couldn't fathom. If you'd have told me, a couple of years from now, you'd be talking about golf and brake pads with a couple of dudes and having the time of your life, man. But just enjoying the ride. And I've got a little girl on the way in November, and it's my first. And like I said, I wasn't welcome in my own family's homes, and now I have people in my life that have opened their home to me. Throwing a baby shower for me and my girlfriend, and this is all through Alcoholics Anonymous, right? And the relationships that I've made in these rooms. I go from a guy who's not welcomed anywhere to somebody who's, people are opening their homes and making me a part of their lives and planning this stuff for me, right? So these are all just these are blessings, right? But I think more than that, the relationships and all that stuff is good, and I could give you a list of material things that you get back in sobriety, because it comes to find out if you get sober for a while and you keep a job, you can get some material things. But I'll be honest with you, man, I think the more important stuff is those relationships that I've had. The type of people that I'm around now, right? I used to have a bunch of fair weather friends, and the people that I'm around now that even when I'm struggling, I'm going through something, I'm not the most pleasant person to be around, because that still happens. They don't leave my side, you know what I mean? And the friends I used to keep, they would come and go. And so today, my life is not this, look, I'm not where I want to be, right? And I don't think I'll ever get there. But I can tell you that I'm at peace with where I'm at. I know I'm exactly where God wants me, and I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. And I think that when we can find that place, then we're all right, And I just try and take it day by day. And Steve, you said it in that prayer out there before I came up here, man. Just Rule 62 really would not take ourselves too seriously, man. I try to remind myself of that on a daily basis too. Just stay humble, try and help others, and seek God. I truly believe if I do those things, right, if I just try to practice some humility, help somebody else, seek God, then I'm probably going to stay sober today. And if I can string a couple of those days together, I'm going to stay sober for another year. And the guys that have walked this path before me and have sponsored me, I mean, that's really the example they set, I would call them with all these problems I'm having, right? Because I'm a year sober and life sucks and it's supposed to be roses and I'm supposed to have money and a new house and all this stuff by now, all these material things that I wanted, and I'm giving them all these problems with work and this and that and girl problems, and they're like, we should probably pray and find somebody to help. And it used to make me so angry. I'm like, man, what is he talking about? Like, I'm the guy that needs the help. Like, you're supposed to help me, dude. That's why I'm calling you. And then I finally, got out of my own way and I started taking some of those suggestions, right? And then today I know that's the solution to most of my problems. If I just seek God and find somebody to help, my problems really aren't problems. It's just how I perceive them. And so with that, man, I don't know if I'm running pretty close here, so I won't take up any more of your time, but thank you guys again for having me.